My name is Natalie Dielman. I'm the programming coordinator at Way Public Library in Perrysburg, Ohio, and I'll be your host this session. I'm so pleased to welcome Ian Ryan. Ian has been a diehard U2 fan since he heard Discotheque in school. He managed the lyrics section of the @U2 website from 2002 to 2020 and wrote for the site as well. And tonight he'll be talking to us about U2's first decade of lyrics, Boy to Baby.
Yeah, happy to have you all here. One of the things I was just thinking about right before this started was they released 7 albums in 11 years, and now it's kind of crazy how sparse their album releases are. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff to go through in their first 10, 11 years. And this will just be me presenting, so I would encourage all of you to chime in if you have any thoughts. It's not going to be a discourse between me and one other person. If any of you have any thoughts, please feel free to chime in. I would welcome it. So I'm going to do a screen share with just some basic slideshow that I've got, and if any of you want to chime in as you feel appropriate, go for it. Otherwise, we can wait till the end and have a discussion. But yeah, highly encourage group discussion here. So give me just a moment. Sorry, I have only been doing Zoom screen shares from my work computer. I have not done it from my home computer yet, so give me just a moment. Zoom will not be able to record the contents of your screen until you quit. So give me one moment. I need to quit the app and I'll be right back. Sorry about this.
Technology's awesome when it works, right?
I know.
There's an irony about this conference about Achtung Baby, and we're all staring at screens that don't quite work.
Everything you know is wrong.
This is how we've been doing programming at my library for like the past 18 months. So we've just moved back to in-person, and it's, the learning curve at the beginning was just, it was rough.
Yeah, I mean, teaching through a screen was I mean, I'm high energy anyway, but to be able to reach students through a screen, it's like I had to become like double or triple, and it was exhausting. It was exhausting. Anyway, hey, there's Ian. All right, cool.
Yay. Oh, Ian, you're muted.
Zoom drives me insane. It truly drives me insane. Anyways, let's try this again. Let's see. So share screen. Can you please allow screen sharing? It says it's disabled.
Try it.
I'm now the co-host.
Yeah,
I'm now the co-host.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you all see that? Sweet.
Great.
So yeah, just wanted to, Scott invited me to do a kind of overview of U2's first decade of lyrics. And I mean, it seemed only appropriate to call it From Boy to Baby. Kind of a regression on their part, but yeah, it is what it is. So starting off with Boy, as I said earlier today in a session, I am very much a believer in the idea that U2's albums come in trilogies, and the first trilogy was about growth. So Boy is about growth of self. It's very much self-oriented. It's very much about how Bono views his relationships and his friendships, specifically with like Googie and the other folks. And I don't know if a name was ever given, but the friend they had who had electroshock therapy, that was the inspiration for Electric Co. And it was very much about his specific spot in Dublin, and his relationship with his family, his loss of his mother, things like that. So the first two albums, I think, were very self-absorbed. And I don't say that in a negative way. I just say that that's what they were about. They were about him and his life. He wrote songs about suicide. So he was clearly concerned about himself. He was that self-aware. He wrote a song, he wrote Ancat Dub about when he had been seeing another girl when he and Ali had split up for a while. So he was romantically confused. But you still get very much a feeling that they're stuck in Dublin, that the band's point of view in Boy is very Dublin oriented. And yeah, as I said in like an earlier panel, one of the things that interests me as a gay guy is they have like gay connotations in their albums sometimes, and songs like Stories for Boys, and it's like lyrics like In the Shadow, Boy Meets Man. They were taken to heart in the gay community. That all happened before I was coming of age and like thinking about that stuff. But Bono has mentioned that Boy was taken as a gay album. Unfortunately, the cover with Peter Rowan that we see was banned in the US because it was taken not as a gay cover, but as a pedophile cover, which is why they had those like sketchy, scanned, photocopied pictures of their heads on the American cover. But yeah, it's I think it's a more complex album than they had intended it, and I think that's when U2 albums are at their best. So next one is October, and again, very self-absorbed, very self-focused. Yeah, where the previous album was about growth of self, this one's, to my mind, is about growth of faith. It's maybe their most literal album, but I don't think it's their most religious album. I think Pop is probably their most religious album, but it's still, yeah, very religious, to the point where like Bono's just screaming, "He is coming, he is coming." I think part of that is them, dealing with their experience in Shalom, and I think part of it is Bono dealing with the loss of his mom. And I mean, it never really gets talked about, but Larry lost his mom at the same time, around the same time, and it's very easy to attribute U2's music to Bono's loss of his mother, especially with songs like Iris or Lemon or I Will Follow. But yeah, it's more difficult to see if Larry's loss of his mother comes into it at all. I live in Portland and I love Portland, but two people in Portland stole the original lyrics to October, and I think that made the album suffer. The album's lyrics do sound very, very rushed and kind of off the cuff. there was a bit of healing. So the reason why I remember this specific date, it was April 15th, which was tax day, and the day that Joey Ramone died, and the day that U2 played Elevation in Portland. So all those things came together and stuck in my memory, but they got their lyrics back. Bono has never said if the lyrics were better than what they released on the album, but they got their lyrics back. But yeah, the album definitely has kind of a slap together feel to it. And so next one is War, which I view as their album about growth of purpose. It was their most political album to date, and I still think it's one of their most political albums. They explain they explore much more of an awareness of situations in the world as opposed to situations just in their lives. And there's always the context of, am I saying that about Bono or am I saying that about the whole band? And it's never quite clear. But yeah, they are definitely more aware of their space in the world and not just their space in their own lives. And so that's why, yeah, I view it as the growth of purpose album. Bono sings about the death of himself in A Day Without Me, but in Surrender, he sings about the death of someone else. And it kind of moves from just self-awareness to awareness of other people, which I think is kind of a lyrical and mental growth in how he's approaching his lyrics. And so, yeah, that's what I mean by sympathy for others as opposed to just self. So what he's talking about, Sadie got off on the 40th whatever floor. She's going to find out what she's looking for. I mean, I always took that to be about someone who jumps off a building. So he's not thinking about his own suicide. He's thinking about someone else's suicide. And I think that's what kind of ratchets their lyrics up a notch, where they start becoming more externally aware as opposed to internally aware. And one of the things I was thinking about when I was getting all this together is after the 90s, they started becoming more internally aware as far as their lyrics go. Bono started singing more about I rather than we or us. After War and through Pop, a lot of their lyrics referred to we or us. And before that, there was a lot more I. And after that, there was a lot more I. And I can't speak to what the mindset would be that would create that lyric shift, but it's just something I found interesting. So then they go on to their America trilogy. So Unforgettable Fire is America from a Distance. Bono's lyrics definitely click up a level, probably due to Brian Eno, just because I've seen what Brian Eno did with Coldplay and Viva La Vida. And yeah, Viva La Vida's lyrics are better than anything else Coldplay has done. And I suspect that's due to Brian Eno's influence. And so I think, yeah, it also kicked up U2's lyric quality. They're definitely more emotionally aware. They're definitely more aware of the world outside them. They're starting to like directly link with the civil rights movement in the US, and they're not being subtle about it. And they're more in tune with like the drug struggles within their communities, definitely more artistic. And Bono, I mean, like in songs like Promenade and stuff like that, he definitely seems more romantic and atmospheric. I think getting away from Steve Lillywhite was definitely a good move for them at that point in their career. And it shows on the album. It's not super focused in a way that I think like Joshua Tree is, but you can definitely see what they're going for. And for the life of me, when you look at the cover, you see Bono with his head over his head. I mean, with his arm over his head, but it will never not look to me like he doesn't just have a towel wrapped up on his head. So then we get to the Joshua Tree. It's a much angrier album than even War. And I think that's probably because rather than just empathizing with people, specifically Bono had gone to places where people were truly suffering. He had seen villages I shouldn't say villages, but at least one village in El Salvador being bombed. And so he had a more practical idea of what geopolitics could create, for good or for ill. And this is the first album, I think, that they had truly a more global vision of what the art was they wanted to present, and largely expressed through Bono's lyrics. And I think that is carried through for the rest of their careers, but this is the album where it really opened up. Bono really started using poetic license in this one. Like, I mean, the phrase "bullet the blue sky," grammatically not correct, but it creates a very specific image, like a bullet just being shot through the blue sky. And he hadn't done that much previously. It's also a very biblical album. Like, best example is One Tree Hill, like, I'll see you again when the stars fall from the sky and the moon turns red over One Tree Hill. That's direct biblical imagery. And I think he uses it very potently. For me, this is the album where he really came into his own as a lyricist and a poet. It's one of those albums. Sometimes you see artists where they just have like an upgrade level, like Pokemon evolves to the next level, Bono evolved to the next level, lyrically. And yeah, it's very interesting to parse through. I think Rattle and Hum suffered lyrically just because it was mixed with the live tracks and the studio tracks. Some of the live tracks they came from previous albums, and so the context of those songs in those albums was kind of removed and just put in, I don't want to say as filler, but didn't necessarily fit the vibe of the rest of the album. It feels like a very unfocused album. It feels like an album that was a bit more like required because they had so much success with the Joshua Tree that they needed to just get something else out. This is their In America album. To me, this is the album where they're not looking at America from a distance or up close. They're in America, and this is their response to that. It kind of feels like their most forced album to me, and I say that with the awareness of them perpetually trying to get a radio hit over the past couple of decades. But yeah, this kind of feels like their most forced album. The lyrics to me don't really have any focus apart from being about what they've experienced in America. And I mean, that's a fair enough way to go. But yeah, I think this album is definitely more about the lyrics of individual songs rather than the lyrics as a whole, if that makes sense. And then we get to Achtung Baby, and some of the best lyrics of Bono's career. Some of his best poetry. We talked about it in the earlier session, how the lyrics in this album relate to love. I think this is their only album about love, and it covers spiritual love / biblical love. It covers romantic love and it covers the loss of love. And it makes it very complex and very interesting to delve into the lyrics as far as that is concerned. It's, I kind of want to say it's their first adult album, because they were just riding on a wave through the 80s. And I mean, they say that the human mind doesn't finish growing until you're about 25. So even through Rattle and Hum, they were still fundamentally young people. They were just doing awesome stuff. But yeah, this truly feels like their first adult album. And it also addresses the complications that can come up between the family that you're born into and the love that occurs there versus the family that you choose. So like a song like Ultraviolet, I feel that that's a song about how Allie Hewson was able to help Paul Hewson temper his thoughts about Bob Hewson. It's because Bono specifically references Bob Hewson as being the opera in his head. And Bono says, well, when I had the opera in my head, your love was a light bulb hanging over my bed. And I wasn't able to put that together until they released later albums, but Bono specifically refers to Bob as the opera. And he says, when I had opera in my head, when I was too focused on my family, your love was the light bulb. And yeah, it's just, it gets much more complex. It's also a violent album and it's a cruel album. Like The Fly is a song, Bono has said it's about a phone call from someone in hell. And I'd imagine that's not a fun, happy place to be. And you don't know if it's a literal hell or a figurative hell. Love is Blindness. I've always taken to be a song about a car bombing, probably with the IRA, but then Bono still connects it with a sexual pleasure. He says a little death, which in French, le petit mort is a term for orgasm. And le petit mort, a little death. So he brings a sexual component into what seems to be a violent act. It definitely notches up a bit as far as like the poetry and the complexity and how much you can read into it or how much you can choose not to read into it if you don't want to. So anyways, those are my initial thoughts. I'd love if this became a discussion rather than just me monologuing, because if I monologue, I will not shut up. So yeah, I'm happy to invite any of the rest of you to join in.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, this is Joshua Eubanks. First of all, Ian, you did a fantastic job on your presentation. I was really impressed with your PowerPoint and some of the thoughts you brought to the table. But I wanted to go back to something you said about Unforgettable Fire.
Mm-hmm.
When you said that you felt that Eno pushed Bono in particular to bring a higher level of lyrics to the table.
Sure.
And I was thinking about songs like Elvis Presley in America, and how unfocused and how fuzzy that is. Even Bad, which I think is a phenomenal track, has been accused or maybe vilified for having unfocused lyrics. And I wondered how you take that into account with your theory about, bringing their lyrics to a higher level.
Well, so I'm not going to reference Bad. I will reference Elvis Presley in America. When where Bono didn't know he was being recorded when he sang that, but he had just been encouraged to be more experimental and just kind of do like whatever he wanted with his words. And then, if I remember correctly, Elvis Presley in America is a slowed down version of the A Sort of Homecoming. They just really slowed A Sort of Homecoming down, and then they put his just freeform lyrics that he didn't know were being recorded over that. And that's what I mean. It forced them, I shouldn't say forced them, it forced Bono to just experiment more, think more about what he was doing, or not think more. Because I mean, you get the feeling, like off the first 3 albums, that he's intense and he's passionate, and oh, these are the words he wants to say. You don't, and I say that with the knowledge that October was largely improvised, just because, as I said, the lyrics are stolen. But yeah, I get the feeling that on Unforgettable Fire, they were just being told to be more creative, and I get that vibe also because that's what Brian Eno told Coldplay to do on Viva La Vida, and it seems like a pattern. It seems like he's good at getting folks to bump up to the next level.
Cool, good answer. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey Ian, nice point about. I mean, interesting point about the progression of the lyrics over the first 3 albums, and then it takes a turn on Unforgettable Fire. I mean, it's not coincidental that their sound takes a drastic turn on Unforgettable Fire too, and of course that's due to Eno and Lanois. But I mean, you know, that album, the Unforgettable Fire, it was a turning point in U2's career, both sonically and lyrically. But it's interesting that you say that their sound that their lyrics get unfocused, but their sound also expands. Their sonic canvas, like it grew exponentially with the addition of Eno and Lanois. So there was a sonic expansion as well as a lyrical expansion.
Totally.
And that I mean, it's very U2 that both of those things would happen at the same time on the same album, and I mean it of course exploded their career. So awesome point about that.
That was also the time when Bono was taking vocal lessons from Chrissy Hynde of the Pretenders. So he became a much better singer. So yeah, Joshua Tree was definitely a level up, but Unforgettable Fire was also a level up.
Well, and I think we can draw maybe an interesting parallel then between Unforgettable Fire and Achtung Baby, right? I mean, it's a total like 180 for their sound, right? From the first trilogy to this, to the start of the second trilogy, and then again to the start of the third trilogy.
Absolutely, yeah. But what really interests me is how it was the same producers that forced them to level up again. It's like they didn't have to bring in new producers, just wherever they were vibing at that time. Eno and Lanois, like it sounds like Lanois is generally in the studio all the time with them, and Eno comes in like once every week or two and just like smashes everything and rebuilds it. But yeah, it's interesting that those 2 people have been able to force the band to just get so much better multiple times. It's not a coincidence. They do all truly vibe well together.
Well, I like your point about the trilogies of albums. That's really making me think about things differently. And I wonder, with the ones in the 90s, Achtung and then Zoo and Pop, when I read about how those developed, it almost feels like one continuous project that wasn't necessarily 3 separate albums, but they all kind of bled into the next, and they never felt happy with Pop and all that. We know those stories. Were the earlier albums, those were more distinct, right? Like even from Unforgettable Fire to Joshua Tree to Rattle and Hum, of course, lots of the same things carrying over. But do you think they were 2 trilogies of 3 separate albums, or are they always thinking kind of 3 albums out, and that's the extent of their energy for that sound?
I get the impression that's just how they flow. I don't think it's done necessarily on purpose. I'm waiting to see what their next album is, because they've really set it up with Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. If the next one isn't Songs of Something, I'm going to be sorely let down. But yeah, it's no, I totally agree with you with their 90s work. I think their 90s work, yeah, is about loss of love on Achtung Baby, and loss of purpose on Zooropa, and loss of faith on Pop. And I definitely agree with you that there was more of a flow between the three albums in the 90s as opposed to the other ones. The early ones do feel more distinct, but I think that might be just because they were younger and they were still learning, and conceptually they weren't processing stuff necessarily the same way. And their individual experiences at the time may have seemed more important than when they got older. Like, I mean, I know for me, like, individual experiences I had in my teens and my 20s stand out much more as like monuments, as opposed to as I've gotten a bit older, where stuff just seems to flow a bit more. And this is entirely supposition on my part, but yeah, it's, I don't think it was intentional in either phase, but I think it's just how it's worked out.
I think we also have to take, the age of the band and their experience. We have to take that into account when we talk about not just the evolution of their lyrical quality, but how they write their songs and what they're writing about. So in the 90s might have felt like a cohesive three-album, or like a cohesive project spread over 3 albums, because they were all global superstars at that point. So they all had a shared experience of, oh, we're on the top now. And so they whereas on Boy and October and War, when they're still fighting for traction, when they're still fighting to or playing their way up the gig ladder, right, to from the clubs to the big stadiums, they're still boys, right? They're still young, so they're still 4 different guys. So their lyrics might reflect that that diversity, whereas they hit it big with Joshua Tree, and so the 90s, part of the 90s, they're exploring together what it's like to be on top of the mountain. And so that I think might bring a little musical and lyrical cohesive to the 90s, where there wasn't that previous in the 80s, because they were still learning.
Sure.
I'm really sitting here thinking about the idea of Unforgettable Fire as an album about America from a distance, because it never occurred to me to think of it that way, even though, I mean, there is a song on there. Well, there are so many songs on there that reference America, right?
Yeah,
which I guess I just never thought about. To me, it seems like a very liminal kind of album, like it's in this space in between, right? And it's sort of bridging War to Joshua Tree, because there are those sort of activist songs, but then there are the America songs. And yeah, I think that's the atmospheric part of it for me. It just feels very like dusk, dawn, you can't quite see where you are, Bono's improvised lyrics.
A sort of homecoming, just rainy, snowy weather. Yes, very much understand. I very much understand. No, but I mean, they've got Pride, which is about Martin Luther King, even if he got the time wrong. They got a song specifically MLK. They got Indian Summer Sky. And as far as I know, the concept of Indian Summer is an American thing. They saw the Unforgettable Fire presentation at a museum in Chicago. To me, yeah, it's them starting to get acquainted and starting to ingest the complications of America as people who have not grown up here, who have just seen it from a distance, if that makes sense.
Ian, I I just want to mention, I think that musically, though, I think it's a European record. I've always thought that it was sort of there was a contradiction there. To quote something from The Fly, that some of the words that go on The Fly in the live show, contradiction is balance. And I've always thought that the Unforgettable Fire had both the sound of it was very European to me, and it was very experimental in a way that did not sound like an American record. I always thought it was a European record, but lyrically, I agree with you that I think that they were sort of coming to terms with this mythical land and the whether it's something like the effects of the atomic bomb, Martin Luther King. I mean, bad is more universal, I think, but Elvis Presley in America, obviously, sort of name checking, even if it's sort of the words don't necessarily conform to anything. So I always think of it as sort of a fractured record in the best possible way.
I guess I kind of have thought of it as U2's most jazzy record, and that's probably because I think Miles Davis said that 4th of July was his favorite song ever, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, I kind of associate the album a bit with American jazz in kind of the, and I'm sorry, we're way off Achtung Baby. I'm sorry. But yeah, no, yeah. But yeah, it's a much more free-form album than I think anything else they've ever done that hasn't been a B-side or live. There's more. I mean, it's definitely a finished product, and the products are definitely polished, but it definitely feels like
atmospheric. I think it's their
yeah.
most atmospheric record, which is the closest thing to an ambient type of thing. I mean, the only other thing I can think of is of Joshua Tree B-sides that had some atmospherics to the same extent, but I think it was a very, if they did an ambient record, leaving aside original soundtracks or something like that, it would be the Unforgettable Fire, because a lot of it's like tone poems almost. They're not songs. They're more
their thoughts,
moods.
Yeah.
When
you say it's their most atmospheric Eno record, I would also say, and I say this in the jazz sense, not the sense, it's their most scat record. It's their album that is the most just kind of off the top of your head as they're performing. And yeah, I honestly think having Eno and Lanois kind of freed them up a bit.
Yep.
Well, you would say that there is some American aspect to the lyrics, but I feel like Promenade and a sort of Homecoming and Unforgettable Fire lyrically still feel like they come more from the water and the seaside in Europe. I still think there is a European flair to the lyrics.
Oh, totally.
Pride and MLK.
But I could also see Promenade being about like walking on the New Jersey seashore, walking along the promenade there.
So maybe Unforgettable Fire is kind of a transition album because it has elements of both America and U2 on it. So yes, it sounds European because U2 is European, but it's got American elements because they're referencing it, and U2's still learning. So that's why it kind of has one foot in one land and one foot in the other, because U2's still learning about it, right? So yeah, I think depending upon your perspective and depending upon which song or groups of songs you're listening to / comparing / analyzing, the flavor or the nationality of Unforgettable Fire is a little bit flexible, maybe.
America from a distance.
We've got a question in the chat from Sherry. It's interesting that from 85 to 86, they're doing the Self-Aid, Live Aid, Amnesty shows. Their humanitarian charity work impacted their work in the late 80s. Bono said in the lead up to Achtung Baby that people were fatigued by that do-goodery. So do you think that Achtung Baby is a response to that fatigue? Great question.
So just my personal opinion, And yeah, this will be slightly not safe for work, but I kind of feel like U2 didn't lose their musical virginity until they got to Achtung Baby. And so that, like, they were pure before Achtung Baby. They were, yeah, they were sincere and they were doe-eyed and they
were innocent, right?
yeah.
Yep.
They rallied for the right cause and stuff like that. And then with Achtung Baby, they kind of lost their musical virginity and things just started going in very different directions. And I could totally see just having that cork popped, like, be a great release from all the like philanthropy and stuff. And I mean, it's not like they stopped doing philanthropy. They still did like, oh shoot, what was the name of the nuclear plant they protested? Stop Sellafield, and the Miss Sarajevo pageant, all that sort of stuff. They were still like fully involved in it, but it wasn't quite so core to their identity as a band. And yeah, they may just have felt they had a little bit more wiggle to their step. Supposition.
Ian, coming back to that point of the atmospheric moods and the impressionistic element on Unforgettable Fire, I've heard others talk about those same things and use the word romantic, or that's an album of romanticism. Which you could also say, same thing, maybe a synonym for innocence in a way. But would you call Achtung Baby any, less romantic, more romantic, if it's coming, as a kind of a bookend maybe to a journey there, coming through this romantic look at the world, doing a lot of good things, getting tired of being a do-gooder, or at least being tired, getting tired of the burden of being a do-gooder. What's Achtung Baby? If it's romantic or realistic or equal balance of both, maybe?
No, I'd say it's totally about the loss of love. It's the whole there is no end to grief because there's no end to love. Achtung Baby is about someone who's had their heart broken, which is a completely romantic concept. So they were still like, I don't know, very much in their heads about where they'd let their emotions take them as opposed to just practicality. But yeah.
Are you sure though that love is the only thing with Achtung Baby? I feel like when I watch it, I think of despair and betrayal, and I don't think of it only on a romantic point. It feels also a huge album about doubt. And I know it moves further into Europa, but I think the doubt starts in Achtung Baby.
Yep, I agree 100%. Yeah, like I said, I think Achtung Baby is about the loss of love, and the loss of love can cause so many cascading issues, and it can be loss of love in a song like Ultraviolet, where Bono doesn't know where he stands with his girlfriend or his dad. It can be a loss of love with Edge's divorce in Love Is Blindness. It can be an Acrobat. It can be loss of love just societally in Love Is Blindness with, like I said, I think it's about an IRA car bombing. It can be about So Cruel, where that song is just completely about loss and just watching the love fall apart. It can be about, I kind of view The Fly as like a follow-up to So Cruel, because like that's when the person has fallen. The person just feels so low spiritually and mentally. And so the song is about, it's a phone call from hell, and they're finally having to deal with all their truths that they weren't dealing with before because they were in love. And so Cruel is like recognizing that, hey, things are falling apart. And then The Fly is the bitter person left over afterwards, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I hear, Achtung Baby is absolutely a romantic record, but I think it's a romantic record lowercase r and also
Yes.
uppercase R, right? Like I was just talking about this with my students today, actually, and musically in the romantic era, the 19th century, musically harmony and texture exploded, right? So things took a huge turn for the things expanded musically at least in the Western tradition after Beethoven, right? So things got much crazier in terms of sizes of ensembles, the form of pieces, the harmony took crazy turns, and I hear Achtung Baby kind of being that turn in U2's career. So it's a romantic record in that it reflects a lot of the ideals from the romantic era, but also it's a romantic record lowercase r because it's absolutely about love and the loss of love and what love means and the different kinds of love. So I think it's a romantic record, both capital R and lowercase r.
Chris, do you keep your U2 collection at work?
I do. This is my school office. Yes, I do. All of my students. Yeah, yes. Everybody here knows. Yes, I do.
Kudos. I wish I could keep my collection. Well, no, I'd rather have two collections now that I think about it, one at work and one at home.
Yes, that's the ideal. Yes.
Yeah, at least you flaunt.
I was actually thinking in the Until the End of the World book discussion, we were talking about, about the Gulf War and the reaction, how we all felt when that was happening. And I was thinking sort of about U2's activism and their activism in the 80s, right? Very idealistic, and how the 90s stuff seems very cynical, like cynical activism, like what happens during the concerts, like calling Bush and just kind of being like, kind of being punks essentially. Mm-hmm. And I think like Achtung Baby is a cynical album to me, right? And I think that I'm Gen X, so that is seen as like a cynical generation, right? Sort of mistrusting authority and not wanting to sell out. And all of that is very wrapped up for me because I think that U2, when I saw U2 the first time in Rattle and Hum, like the movie, I was like, oh my gosh, you can be politically active and you can be idealistic. Mm-hmm. This is amazing. And then I think you get a little bit older and maybe you lose a little bit of that idealism. And I think, right, that's what's happening, I think, in this album.
Yes, but then they go right back to it with Zoo Robot. And it feels like, yeah, I honestly haven't thought enough about it, but this album, just the more I listened to, and I've been listening to it for like decades now, but it is truly an album about love, and I can totally understand them taking like a little bit of a excursion away from politics before coming back to it, because they had just like done politics on War and Joshua Tree and Rattle and Hum, and I could see them wanting to just like, hey, can we take a bit of a breather and talk about the dissolution of our friend's marriage? So one of the things I find very interesting about U2 is that they have so many songs about love, but they only have one album about love, and it's interesting to go through.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
Megan, if you're trying to talk, you might be on mute.
I was talking to myself. I was on mute.
No worries.
I was thinking about whether or not we had any other later albums that could be love. And maybe, I don't know. In a lot of ways, Songs of Experience feels a lot about love. And maybe it's not the same kind of love, love of family.
I could see it. So like, yeah, for me, like I said, I view them as trilogies, and so I'm waiting to see what the third album is. Like for me, the trilogy that comes after the Lost trilogy in the 90s. There's the Acceptance trilogy, which I think All That You Can't Leave Behind is about acceptance of mortality. And I think Atomic Bomb is about acceptance of where you are in the world. And I think No Line is about acceptance of like geographical place in the world, just because I think it's their most like geographically centered album. They reference so many locations and traveling and stuff from here to there. I mean, I don't know if they've ever referenced as many geographical locations on another album, like Bay of Cadiz and Cedars of Lebanon, and I'm a Paris cop, Rue de Marais, or a traffic cop, Rue de Marais in Paris. It's a very geographically centered album, at least to me. And so I always took that about like acceptance of place. So yeah, I'm waiting to see what they do with their next album before I like force it into my own internally set up idea that they do trilogies.
I could see Atomic Bomb being an album about love. I've never thought of it quite like that, but I think it's, I don't know. I think it's love, not of in the way that a 30-year-old pop star conceives of it and all the things they were wrestling with in Achtung Baby, but more like outward focused on other people and the relationships at that time, and then ending with Yahweh, which for Bono is a cry to the ultimate source of love, the ultimate heart.
Neil, unrelated, but has anyone ever told you that the tie that you're wearing looks a lot like the cone from U2 360?
No, no.
It looks like the little video cells have been rotated, but it looks
Gotta sing Zeropa from inside it now.
exactly.
Could I add something to the idea of acceptance? I can definitely see acceptance of geographic place, but I also feel like it is almost the follow-up to October. And No Line on the Horizon. If you look at it, it's almost an acceptance of spiritual place. You've got Bono singing Magnificent, I was born to sing for you. You have Unknown Caller, and there's a resolution to the spiritual search. I feel like the geographical is almost a stand-in for a journey, but it's almost like Bono and the band are accepting their spiritual place in the world. So I think that the location could be more than a physical location. I often have seen it as a follow-up to October.
Do you think pop ties in with that as well? Just because I think pop is probably their most religious album. It's just very depressed about religion.
In a dislocation point of view.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of orientation, disorientation, reorientation. In some ways, I feel like No Line on the Horizon is a reorientation album.
No, I could definitely see where you're coming from. I haven't listened to it with that ear before, but yeah, I will try and think about that next time. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, but yeah, I'll give it a listen with that ear.
Well, yeah, but when you said pop, I could certainly see how that you could be connected. Thanks for bringing the pop one up as a disorientation.
Yeah, it's like October is, I don't want to say about zealotry, but there are times when it feels a bit like zealotry, where you're just like, I will go back to Jerusalem and I will be there and the horns will play. And then you go to pop and it's like, Jesus, where the fuck are you? Do you even love me anymore? And yeah, so next time I listen to No Line, I'll think about it in that context.
Yeah, but there's the zealots are on pop also, aren't they? I mean, they're being taught, they're being sung at or sung about. Yeah, it's interesting. Huh. Neil, is this story, help me out, crowd, is this story true or not? But how to dismantle an atomic bomb, right? I mean, Bono and Michael W. Smith were talking, and right, he asked the question. The answer is love, right? Love is how you dismantle an atomic bomb. I can't remember where that would be as a source. I don't know how to track that down.
I've heard that. Yeah.
You've heard that? Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've heard it from Michael W. Smith. I think he referenced it when he did the U2’s radio. I still couldn't believe that U2 had Michael W. Smith. That still blows my mind.
Right.
Because I kind of live in both cultures. I am a Christian and a church-going Christian, but I never feel like I quite belong to that culture. And so when I hear about people from that culture infiltrating my U2 culture, it fascinates.
Infiltrating.
The zealots.
Well, but you know what the original version of that album title was, right?
What was it?
How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. So his dad is still ringing in his head.
Yeah. That's why you need a light bulb.
Yeah. No, it's I love finding like the little like connect the dots throughout U2's lyrics, and I love it how they can still sound so fresh, and he can come up with new ideas, and then you still start peering through them, and they're just like, oh, you're just still talking about the same damn thing, aren't you? You just can't get over it, can you? But I mean that in the most affectionate way. Like, I think he's one of the best poets of our lifetimes, and his lyrics have brought me great joy.
So Ian, now what you need to do is put all of the same numbers of each trilogy together and see what comes out there, like the first album of each trilogy and the second album of each trilogy, and see what comes out of that. I'm just thinking about that because I'm reading through Dante's Divine Comedy right now, and some people look at each canto, like the one from Inferno and the same number from the other two, and see what resonances there are.
Interesting. I wonder if we could find if the albums, what if we do like a Pink Floyd Wizard of Oz thing where we line up all the albums and see if they play together. Anyways.
Love it. I love that idea. Yeah, go ahead, Megan. I think you're our final thought, Megan.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, like, I have to admit, I love a lot of music. And don't get me wrong, I love the music of U2. Of course I do. But I think the reason they are still my favorite band is because the depth of their lyrics, and quite frankly, it's so hard to find people who, for me, as someone who holds, and I know not everybody is, but holds my faith very important, but cannot deal with how saccharine the Christian world is for the most part. U2 feel like one of the only places I can actually see the world and my faith together. And I love how Bono does that in such a believable way. And I'm grateful, and that really means a lot to me.
And one of the things I love about U2, I'm an atheist, but I love Bono's religious lyrics because they give their songs such a bigger context and like such a big feel and such an emotional feel. And I think they would definitely be a worse band if they weren't people of faith. It's one of the things I appreciate the most about them, even if I don't share it. I definitely think it's a positive quality within them. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Ian. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Fantastic presentation. So fun to talk about all the albums and the connections.